Good morning students, welcome to our English class. Before this, I am Dimple Soni, your English teacher. So we are going to start from the literature part. And from the literature part, I have taken the first chapter, the portrait of a lady, and this is from Horrors, which is written by Khushwant Singh. In this chapter, the narrator is describing how he used to spend his time with his grandmother when he was very young, when he was in the age of childhood. He used to spend most of his time with his grandmother, and his grandmother was also a good friend of him. And they were used to spend their time by going to school, by doing the prayer. She also used to taught her grandson the different things related with God, because she is a very good religious woman. And whenever she goes to drop him at the school, she just takes the state chapatis with him so that she can feed the street dogs. And this temple which is near to his school, she used to sit there up to the school is over. Both of them were busy with their own work. The grandson who goes to school, he learns there the different things, and in the same way the grandmother, she used to sit in the temple, she used to recite the prayer and so many things related with God. And after the school is over and her prayer is complete, they both come back to home. In this way she used to spend the time when the child when he was in the childhood age. And there was a relationship changes can be seen when they have shifted from village to city. There was a dramatically change came into the relationship of grandmother and the narrator. So we will see so many different things in this chapter. So let us start with the chapter. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had an old wrinkle for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. My grandmother's portraits hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and a loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Now what the narrator is saying, that he is very much attached with his grandmother. He says that my grandmother is also like the grandmother of others children, and she has wrinkles on her faces because now she is an old woman. The poet says that he had heard about his grandmother that she was very beauty and very pretty, and when she was very young, and he was unable to believe that he had a husband. And he says that his grandfather's portrait was hanging on the wall, who is wearing a turban and a loose-fitting clothes. But as seeing the portrait of his grandfather, he doesn't look like that he had a wife or a children. He looks as a 100-year-old person and who has a number of grandsons. Okay, she had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. No, we were certain she had always been, as we had known her, old, so terribly that she could have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. Now what the narrator is saying about his grandmother, he is saying the grandmother is having only wrinkles on her faces from everywhere. We can see all the faces which is covered with the wrinkles. And he is also saying that she is so terribly old that she could have grown up older. Now she has become an old age lady who could never have been pretty, but is unable to believe for him that in the earlier she would be a very pretty woman. But she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house in spotless white, and one hand resting on the wrist to balance her stoop and the other carrying the beads of her rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over the pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved on inaudible prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the white landscape in the mountain, as expanse of pure white scenery, breathing space and contentment. Now, the narrator is okay, children. So in this para, we came to know that he is describing about his grandmother. His grandmother has become an old lady. She used to spend mostly of her time in reciting the prayer. Her fingers move on the beads of her rosary, and she looks very beautiful and pretty. There is no doubt, according to the author. Now open your books and see where I am reading. My grandmother and I were good friends. My parents let me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in monotonous sing song while she beats and dressed me in the hope that I will listen and get to know by heart. I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate which she had already washed and plastered it with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen. Tie them all in a bundle and bend it to me. After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. Now the author is saying that his grandmother and they both were good friends, and the grandmother whose son they have shifted to the city. Now they have left their son with the grandmother. Now what she used to do, she used to wake him up in the morning and get him ready for the school, make all the materials for him, and she bundle it up and give it to the narrator so that he can easily handle it over to the school. And after that, before going to the school, what they used to do, they used to eat the stale chapati. The grandmother used to make a thick chapati in the night, and the next day they used to eat by putting some butter on it and some sugar in. After that, they used to carry some of the stale chapatis for the street dogs. Next, my grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in the rows, one either side of the veranda, singing the alphabets or the prayer in the course. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. When we both had finished, we would walk back together. This time, the village dogs were need us to temple door. They followed us to our home, groaning and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. Now, after the school is over and the mother's prayer is also over, because where she used to drop him in the school, the temple is just near to the school. She used to go to the temple, recite the prayer. She do all the things which is related with the God. She used to sit and read a number of books which is related with the God. And like this, she used to spend the time. And after the school is over, she comes to pick him up. And at that time, the street dogs follow them because they used to give them the chapati. When my parents were comfortably set in the city, they sent us for their traveling point in the friendship. This was the turning point in both of them because now they have shifted to city. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the street, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of the city house. Now there is a change came between the grandmother. Now they have shifted to school. They both were sharing the same room, but there was a difference. Now she didn't go with him to drop him at the school because he has taken the admission in the English medium school. He used to go to school by bus. Now she used to feed the sparrows instead of street dogs. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. Sometimes she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning. The law of gravity, academic principles, the world being round, etc. This made unhappy. She would not help me with my lesson. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school, and with distress that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. One day I announced that we were being given music lesson. She was very distressed to her music and lewd associations. It was the monopoly of harriers and beggars, and not meant for the gentlefolk. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She rarely talked to me after that. Now he is going to an English medium school. There were no teachings of God, and he was just learning some of the few new things of science, some English words. But the grandmother didn't like this, and when he informed the grandmother that he is going to be given now music lesson also, this words distress her, because she doesn't like the way in the city the children were taught. So she was most distressed when he heard, and she thinks that the music is not meant for the gentlefolk, it is only for the beggars. When I went up to university, I was given a room of my own. The common name of friendship was Snap. My grandmother accepted her secularism with resignation. She rarely left a spinning wheel to talk to anyone from sunrise to sunset. She sat by her wheel spinning and rustling prayer. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda, breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirpings. Some came and perched on her legs, others on her shoulders, some even sat on her head. She smiled but never shooed them away. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day of her. Now what grandmother used to do? Now the grandmother is went up the university and he has got the room there. Now the grandmother feels some aloneness in her life. That is why now she used to spend most of the time on the spinning wheel and doing the prayer. And in the afternoon she used to feed the birds by giving them crumbs of bread and chapatis. Number of thousands of sparrows come and sit around the grandmother. She never shoot them, but in a love affection she used to feed them with the bread. When I decided to go to abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. I would be away for 5 years, and at her age, one could never tell, but my grandmother could. She was not even sentimental. She came to leave me at the railway station, but did not talk or show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayer, her mind was lost in prayer, her fingers were busy telling the beats of a rosary silently. She kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact with us. Now what? Now the author is going to abroad because he has decided for the further studies he will shift to abroad. By hearing this, the grandmother became very disappointed, but she didn't show any sort of emotion. She came to drop him at the station. She also gave him a hug. He was very excited that the mother would say something, but no, she was very busy in reciting her prayer and the fingers kept on moving on her rosary beads. No, the grandmother gave a kiss on his forehead, and she also gave him a hug, and that was the last physical touch between both of them. But that was so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. She did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she chaps me her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayer. Even on the first day of my arrival, the happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer, and with the furious sleepwalks. In the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. Now, after coming from the abroad, again he came to meet with his grandmother. She was there. She gave him a hug, but didn't say even a single word, and not she didn't become even emotional or sentimental. But instead of this, when he gave him a hug, that time the author heard that she is reciting her prayer, and the fingers were kept moving on the beads of her rosary. But he saw a change in his grandmother in the evening time. She did not collect the woman from the neighborhood. There was a change, and this was a big change that the narrator has seen. Why the grandmother is doing this? Every time she is busy in doing the prayer, but no, she has collected the women from the neighborhood and start singing the song. And they were singing the song of homecoming of warriors, means the people, those who come after the war. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstaying. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. And this is the first time the narrator had noticed that she is not doing any sort of prayer. The next morning she was taken ill. It was a mind fever and the doctor told us that it would go away. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. She said that since only a few hours before the close of her last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. Now what they have called the doctor because the grandmother was now ill. The doctor said it is a mild fever and it will go away. But the grandmother, she said that her end is near and this is the last chapter of her life. So before closing the chapter, she want to do the prayer and don't want to waste the time with the family members. We protested but she ignored our protest. She lay peacefully in bed praying and telling her beads. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. Now what they noticed? They noticed that the grandmother was laying on the bed and her lips were moving. But after some time, what they saw? The lips stopped and the beads of the rosary fell from her lifeless finger. And as they saw that the grandmother is dead now. We lifted her off the bed and as it customary, laid on her the ground and covered her with a red shroud. After a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. In the evening, we went to the room with a crude stretcher to take her to the cemented, the sun of setting and had lit her room and veranda. With a blaze of golden light, we stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay, dead and stiff wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. There were no chirpings. We felt sorry for the birds, and my mother fetched some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs the way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them. The sparrows took no notice for the bread, but when we carried my grandmother off, they flew away quietly. Next morning, the sweepers swept the bread crumbs into the dustbin. So this was the end of the chapter. When the grandmother died, according to custom, they laid the body on the floor. And what they noticed when they preparing for her funeral, they saw thousands of sparrows were sitting around the grandmother. They didn't even chip. They were sitting quietly. And when the grandmother was taken away, my mother gave some crumbs of bread to them to eat in the same way the grandmother used to do. But the sparrows didn't notice even a single piece of bread. They were showing their sorrowness on the death of the grandmother. So at the end, they flew away silently. And on the next day, the sweeper came and swept away all the pieces into the dustbin. So thank you, students. I hope you all have understood the chapter.